2 days after I buried my mother, her boyfriend showed up at my childhood home with a lawyer and an eviction notice for the $1.8 million house I thought I'd inherited. I was standing in my mother's bedroom when Vincent Harper walked through the front door like he owned the place. Which, as it turned out, he did. In my hands was Mom's favorite sweater, the blue cashmere one Dad had given her for their 30th anniversary, and I was crying the way you cry when grief is still fresh enough to ambush you without warning. The room still smelled like her, lavender and vanilla, the lotion she'd used every night before bed. Her reading glasses sat on the nightstand next to a half-finished mystery novel she'd never get to finish. The morning light came through the windows the same way it had for 44 years, indifferent to the fact that she was gone. I'd taken family leave from my nursing job at Providence, Portland, to care for Mom through her final months of pancreatic cancer. 3 months of watching her waste away, of changing IV bags and managing pain medication, of holding her hand through the nights when the morphine wasn't enough and she'd cry from phantom pain that no drug could touch. 3 months of being both daughter and nurse, trying to give her dignity and comfort as her body betrayed her piece by piece. And now I was trying to figure out how to sort through 44 years of memories packed into this beautiful craftsman home in Northeast Portland. The house Dad had bought in 1980 for $85,000. The house where I'd learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where I'd had my first kiss on the front porch, where I'd brought my own daughter for Sunday dinners before the divorce. The house that was worth $1.8 million now, thanks to Portland's insane real estate market and Dad's refusal to ever sell. The house that was supposed to be mine. Natasha. Vincent's voice cut through my grief like a blade. You need to leave. This is my house now. I turned, confused, my mother's sweater still clutched to my chest. Vincent stood in the doorway with a man in an expensive suit, and neither of them looked like they'd come to offer condolences. What are you talking about? This is Mom's house. It's mine now. Vincent's lawyer, because of course that's who the suit was, stepped forward and handed me a manila folder. Ms. Greene, your mother added Mr. Harper to the deed as joint tenant with right of survivorship in November 2022. Under Oregon law, when your mother passed, the property automatically transferred to Mr. Harper. He is the sole owner. The words didn't make sense. They were English. I understood each one individually, but strung together, they created a reality I couldn't process. That's not possible. Mom would have told me. She wouldn't. She did, Vincent said, and there was something in his voice that made my stomach drop. Something cold and satisfied. Now pack your things and get out. I'm putting this place on the market next week. I looked at this man my mother had dated for 3 years, this man who'd seemed so wonderful and attentive, who'd held Mom's hand through chemo appointments and cooked her meals when she was too sick to eat. This man who was now telling me to get out of my childhood home. You planned this, I heard myself say. You planned this from the beginning. Vincent smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made me understand what evil really looked like. Prove it. The investigation started 48 hours later, after I'd spent 2 days crying on my best friend's couch, clutching legal documents I didn't understand, trying to comprehend how my mother's death had turned from tragedy into theft. I hired Derek Morrison, an estate attorney who specialized in elder abuse cases, and when he saw the deed transfer documents, his face went pale. This is bad, he said. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship means the property bypasses probate entirely. It went directly to Vincent the moment your mother died. Legally, he owns it. But Mom didn't understand what she was signing. She thought it was for tax purposes, to help me avoid probate. That's what Vincent told her. Did she tell you that? I felt my chest constrict with guilt. No, she never mentioned changing the deed at all. I found out about it 2 days ago when Vincent showed up with his lawyer. Derek leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. Miss Greene, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Did Vincent seem interested in your mother's money? Her house? Was there any indication he was financially motivated? I thought back through 3 years of watching Vincent court my mother. The flowers, the dinners, the weekend trips to the coast. The way he'd moved into her house 6 months into their relationship. The way he'd started handling her bills, claiming his real estate expertise could help her save money. He said he was a retired real estate investor, I said slowly. He was always talking about tax strategies and estate planning. Mom trusted him. She thought he was helping her protect my inheritance. I'm going to hire an investigator, Derek said. Because I've seen this before. And if Vincent Harper is who I think he is, your mother wasn't his first victim. Hailey Chen was the kind of private investigator who looked like she should be running a Fortune 500 company instead of digging through public records and surveillance footage. She showed up at Derek's office 3 days later with a stack of files that would change everything. Vincent Harper has been running this scam for 8 years, she said, spreading documents across the conference table. 4 victims before your mother. All wealthy widows, all with valuable real estate. All convinced to add Vincent to their property deeds right before they died. My hand started shaking. 4. Margaret Chen in Seattle, 2016. Died of brain cancer 6 months after adding Vincent to the deed of her $900,000 condo. Susan Rodriguez in Sacramento, 2018. Died of lung cancer 9 months after the deed transfer on her $1.1 million home. Elizabeth Park in San Diego, 2020. Heart failure 8 months after deed change on a $750,000 property. Carol Bennett in Eugene, 2021. Ovarian cancer 7 months after adding Vincent to her $650,000 house. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table. He targets dying women. He targets wealthy widows who are already sick, Hailey corrected. He meets them at support groups, community centers, places where vulnerable people gather. He's charming, attentive, helpful. He moves in fast, gains their trust, convinces them the deed changes for their children's benefit. Then he waits for them to die. I thought about how Mom had met Vincent at the community center, where she'd started going after Dad died in 2018. How lonely she'd been. How much she'd lit up when she talked about this new man who made her laugh again. How grateful I'd been that she'd found companionship in her grief. Jesus Christ. I felt bile rise in my throat. How much? Including your mother's house? $4.3 million over 8 years. Hailey pulled out her phone, her expression grim. But here's where it gets worse. I managed to recover some of Vincent's text messages from cloud backups. Miss Greene, I need to warn you. These are going to be difficult to read, but they're also the smoking gun we need. She handed me the phone. The first message was dated November 18th, 2022, 2 weeks after Mom had signed the deed change. I remember that week. Mom had seemed distracted, mentioned something about paperwork Vincent had helped her with. I'd been dealing with a staffing crisis at the hospital and hadn't pressed for details. Vincent, to unknown contact, got Patricia to sign the deed. She thinks it's to help her daughter lol. Stage 4 cancer patients don't last long. $1.8 million incoming. The words blurred. I read them again, then again, trying to make them mean something other than what they clearly meant. My mother, dying of cancer, thinking she was protecting me, while her boyfriend laughed about how easy she was to manipulate. The lol made me want to scream. He'd found it funny. My mother's trust, her love, her desire to take care of me even after death. All of it was a joke to him. There's more, Hailey said quietly, like she was telling me about another death in the family, which in a way, she was. The next message was from March 15th, 2024. I remembered that day with crystalline clarity. We'd just gotten Mom's diagnosis. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer metastasized to the liver. 3 to 6 months, maybe less. I'd held Mom while she cried, both of us knowing we were about to lose each other. Vincent had been there too, standing in the corner of the doctor's office, his face arranged in an expression of appropriate grief. Apparently, he'd texted his accomplice the moment we left the hospital. Vincent to same contact. Doctor says 3 to 6 months, finally. I've been playing doting boyfriend for 3 years, worth it for $1.8 million. Finally. My mother had just been told she was dying, and Vincent's first thought was finally. I stood up so fast my chair fell backward. I made it to Derek's bathroom before I vomited, my body rejecting the reality of what I'd just read. Vincent had celebrated my mother's terminal diagnosis. He'd counted down the months until she died. He'd sat with her through chemo, held her hand, whispered comforting words, all while calculating how soon he could cash out her house. When I came back to the conference room, Derek was reading through the messages, his face carved from stone. This is enough for criminal charges. Elder abuse, fraud, undue influence. The DA is going to want this. Who's the contact he's texting? I asked. His brother, Marcus Harper. We're still investigating, but it looks like Marcus has been helping Vincent identify targets and launder money. Hailey pulled up more documents. There's also this, dated June 14th, 2 days after your mother died. Vincent to real estate agent. List it for $85 million. I want cash ASAP before the daughter lawyers up. Before the daughter lawyers up. He'd known I'd figure it out eventually. He just wanted to sell the house and disappear before I could stop him. He's going to run, I said. As soon as he gets the money, he's going to disappear. Not if we move fast. Derek pulled out his phone. I'm calling the DA. We need an emergency injunction to stop the sale and freeze Vincent's assets. Then we're going after him for everything. The emergency hearing happened within 72 hours. I sat in the courtroom and watched Vincent's lawyer argue that the deed transfer was perfectly legal, that Patricia Greene had been of sound mind, that she'd voluntarily chosen to add Vincent to the title. Then Derek stood up and played the text messages. The judge's expression changed with each message. When he got to stage 4 cancer patients don't last long, I heard someone in the gallery gasp. When he reached, finally, I've been playing doting boyfriend for 3 years, the judge's jaw tightened. Mr. Harper, the judge said, his voice cold enough to freeze water, did you send these messages? Vincent's lawyer tried to object, but Vincent was already standing, his face flushed. Your Honor, those texts were taken out of context. Yes or no, Mr. Harper? Did you celebrate Ms. Greene's terminal cancer diagnosis? Silence. Vincent's mouth opened and closed, and I watched him realize he'd lost. The sale of the property is immediately enjoined, the judge declared. Mr. Harper's assets are frozen pending criminal investigation. This court finds sufficient evidence of elder abuse, fraud, and undue influence to proceed with both civil and criminal proceedings. The criminal trial began in September 2024, 4 months after I'd been evicted from my childhood home. The courthouse was packed. Media, advocates for elder abuse prevention, families of Vincent's previous victims. All 4 of them were there, these children who'd lost their mothers and their inheritances to the same con artist. Margaret Chen's daughter testified first. She was about my age, maybe a few years younger, and I could see the same exhausted grief in her eyes that I saw in the mirror every morning. He told my mother it was for estate tax purposes. She had brain cancer. She could barely remember my name by the time he convinced her to sign, but she remembered Vincent. He made sure of that. He visited every single day, brought her favorite flowers, read to her when she couldn't focus on the pages anymore. I thought he was a saint. I thanked him for loving my mother when she was at her worst. Her voice broke. He sold her condo 3 weeks after her funeral. I found out when the new owners showed up with a moving truck. Susan Rodriguez's son was in his 50s. A businessman who looked like he'd never cried in public before. He was crying now. My mother died thinking she'd protected me. Vincent was at her bedside when she passed, holding her hand, telling her he loved her. He gave me a hug at the funeral, told me he'd always be there if I needed anything. He laughed, bitter and hollow. 2 days later, he sold her house and disappeared. I didn't even know his real name. It took me 6 months to track him down, and by then, the money was gone. All of it. Elizabeth Park's daughter was younger than me, maybe 35, and she looked like she wanted to kill Vincent with her bare hands. Mom introduced him as her fiancé, said he was helping her get her affairs in order. I was grateful. I lived 3 hours away. I couldn't be there every day. I thought he was taking care of her. She turned to look directly at Vincent. He was taking everything. Her house, her savings, her dignity. And I let him because I trusted my mother's judgment. I trusted that she'd found someone who actually loved her. Carol Bennett's son had his mother's ashes in a necklace around his neck. I could see it catch the light as he leaned toward the microphone. He stayed through the funeral, gave the eulogy, talked about how much he loved my mother, how she'd brought joy back into his life after his wife died. He paused. That was a lie, too. He's never been married. My mother wasn't his first victim or his last. She was just another mark, another dying woman with assets he could steal. 3 weeks after her funeral, I got an eviction notice from his lawyer. I'd been living in my childhood home taking care of Mom full-time. I lost my job, my home, and my mother all at once. And Vincent got $650,000. I watched the jury as each testimony landed. I watched them look at Vincent, this handsome, charming man in his expensive suit, and I watched them start to understand what evil really looked like. It didn't look like a monster. It looked like someone your mother would fall in love with. When it was my turn to testify, I brought photographs. Pictures of Mom with Vincent at Christmas, both of them smiling. Pictures of Vincent pushing Mom's wheelchair through the botanical gardens. Pictures of them at the coast, Mom wrapped in a blanket, Vincent's arm around her shoulders. He was good at it, I told the jury. The performance. He made my mother feel loved and safe right up until the moment she died. And then he tried to steal everything she'd spent her life building. The prosecutor pulled up the text messages on the courtroom screens. Every juror could see them now, blown up in high definition. Ms. Greene, when you read these messages, what did you feel? I looked at Vincent. He was staring at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. I felt like my mother had been murdered. Not by cancer, by him. He might not have physically killed her, but he exploited her illness, manipulated her trust, and celebrated her death. If that's not murder, I don't know what is. The defense tried to argue that Vincent had genuinely cared for Patricia, that the text messages were crude jokes taken out of context, that the previous victims were coincidental. But they couldn't explain why Vincent had accepted a $1.82 million offer on the house 2 days after Mom died. They couldn't explain why he'd already booked a one-way ticket to Costa Rica. They couldn't explain why every single one of his romantic relationships followed the exact same pattern. Wealthy widow, terminal illness, deed transfer, death, sale, disappearance. The prosecutor's closing argument was devastating. Vincent Harper is not a boyfriend. He's not a romantic partner. He's a predator who hunts dying women for their assets. He's a vulture who circles the vulnerable and the sick, and he's not sorry? He's sorry he got caught. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. When they came back, the foreman stood and read the verdict without emotion. On the count of elder financial abuse, guilty. On the count of fraud, guilty. On the count of undue influence, guilty. On the count of attempted theft, guilty. Guilty on all counts. Vincent's face went white. I felt something break open in my chest, not relief exactly, but a kind of exhausted vindication. He'd lost. Finally, after 8 years and 5 victims, Vincent Harper had lost. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge looked at Vincent with something close to disgust. Mr. Harper, you systematically targeted the most vulnerable members of our society. You exploited dying women, violated their trust, and robbed their children of their rightful inheritances. You celebrated terminal diagnoses. You counted down the days until your victims died. You are, in this court's opinion, one of the most morally bankrupt individuals to appear before this bench. He paused, letting the words sink in. This court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison. You are ordered to pay $2.4 million in restitution, the value of Patricia Greene's home plus punitive damages. You are permanently barred from contact with any individual over the age of 65. And the deed transfer is hereby voided as obtained through undue influence and fraud. 12 years. Vincent would be 70 when he got out if he survived prison at all. It should have felt satisfying, but mostly I just felt tired. Tired and angry and sad for my mother, who died thinking she'd found love in her final years, never knowing she'd found a predator instead. The house was returned to me 6 weeks later. I stood in the living room where Vincent had evicted me, where I'd held my mother's sweater and tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong, and I made a decision. I sold it for $1.85 million. Every penny went into establishing the Patricia Greene Elder Protection Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to preventing exactly what had happened to my mother. We provided free legal services for elderly individuals entering new relationships. We offered financial monitoring. We educated families about the warning signs of romance scams. We worked with legislators to close the legal loopholes that had allowed Vincent to operate for 8 years. In our first year, we helped 178 families prevent similar scams. We caught 5 other predators using Vincent's playbook. We recovered $3.2 million in stolen assets for victims' families. And we drafted Patricia's law. I testified before the Oregon State Legislature in January 2025, 7 months after my mother's death. The committee room was full of advocates, attorneys, and families of elder abuse victims. I told them about Vincent, about the text messages, about watching my mother die while her boyfriend celebrated her terminal diagnosis. Patricia's law would require mandatory attorney consultation for any property deed changes involving individuals over 65, I explained. It would trigger automatic review of deed changes made within 6 months of a terminal diagnosis, and it would create criminal penalties for targeting terminally ill individuals for financial gain. I pulled out the text message Vincent had sent. Stage 4 cancer patients don't last long. $1.8 million incoming. This is what my mother's boyfriend wrote while she was dying. This is what he was thinking while he held her hand and told her he loved her. Patricia's law would make it much harder for people like Vincent Harper to prey on vulnerable, dying people. It won't save my mother, but it might save someone else's. Patricia's law passed in March 2025 with unanimous, bipartisan support. Oregon became the first state to require attorney consultation for elderly deed transfers and to criminalize targeting terminally ill individuals for financial exploitation. The law had immediate effects. Within 3 months, it led to the arrest of Vincent's brother Marcus, who'd been helping identify and groom potential victims. We recovered $1.2 million from 2 other families who'd been victimized by Vincent's previous scams. 6 other states began drafting similar legislation. I kept one thing from my mother's house: the blue cashmere sweater Dad had given her for their 30th anniversary. I'd been holding it the day Vincent evicted me, and somehow I'd managed to take it with me. Now it hung in my closet, a reminder of what I'd lost and what I'd fought to reclaim. Some nights I pulled it out and held it, breathing in the faint scent of Mom's perfume. And I thought about the text messages about Vincent celebrating her death. "I got him, Mom," I whispered. "He didn't win. You gave me something better, a reason to fight, and now we're protecting other people's mothers." The Patricia Greene Elder Protection Fund grew. By the end of 2025, we'd expanded to 3 states, helped over 400 families, and prevented an estimated $12 million in elder abuse fraud. Every family we helped, every predator we caught, it was all for Mom. I never forgave Vincent. I didn't see the point. Forgiveness was for people who felt remorse, who understood the harm they'd caused. Vincent understood nothing except his own greed. He'd sent letters from prison, claiming he'd actually loved my mother, claiming the text messages were misunderstood, claiming he deserved another chance. I burned every single one without reading past the first paragraph. But I did forgive myself, for not seeing it sooner, for being grateful Mom had found companionship, for trusting Vincent because Mom trusted him. I'd been a good daughter. I'd cared for Mom through her final months. I'd held her hand as she died. None of that was diminished by Vincent's betrayal. And in the end, I'd done what Mom had wanted all along. I'd protected an inheritance. Not the house, not the money, but something more valuable. I'd protected other daughters, other sons, other families from experiencing what I'd experienced. I'd turned Mom's tragedy into legislation that would safeguard vulnerable people for generations. The blue cashmere sweater still hung in my closet. And sometimes, when the foundation work felt overwhelming, when I read another story about an elder abuse victim, when I testified before another state legislature, I'd take it out and hold it close. "We're winning, Mom," I'd say. "Slowly, one family at a time, we're winning." And I'd like to think that wherever she was, Patricia Greene was proud of what her death had become. Not a cautionary tale, but a catalyst for change. Not a tragedy, but a triumph. Vincent Harper had tried to steal everything, but in the end, he'd only made me stronger. And that was the inheritance Mom had really left me. Not a house, but the strength to fight for justice, the courage to expose evil, and the determination to protect others from predators like him. That would have to be enough, and somehow impossibly it was.